You really can't quantify the waste, but the waste is so big that we are unearthing things that have happened. I don't know how many decades back. When you get into inorganic waste, which is the dry waste, you can, if needed, sort it into as many as 130 to 150 categories. That's how complex it is. And just imagine the supply chain. And we're then talking about millions of tons of waste. And that is the biggest issue with waste management. We have to get into the realms of more of regenerative economy. We're not even talking about, it's too late for circular economy. Let's move on beyond circular economy. There have been a lot of scams that have surfaced recently. For example, recyclers have claimed to have recycled when there is no recycling machinery and there is only a empty facility, so a lot of people have been taken to task on these matters. But EPR scene right now, unfortunately, over the past 2 to 3 years has been very, very bad. Look, as a consumer, I have to demand such that the products that I use, I have a choice to consume something which is coming in a recyclable packaging, for example. And that is where the consumer has the power to push back. And if we all realize, the kind of mess that we are putting ourselves into, then we should be taking this decision quickly.
In urban areas, about 62 million tons of solid waste is generated annually, but only 43 million tons are collected. The remaining waste is either untreated, lying on the roads, or ends up in landfills. Hello and welcome to the OoruLabs podcast. I am your host Sathya Sankaran. Today we speak with Arun Murugesh of Sahas Zero Waste, a sustainable waste management company who have managed 42,000 metric tons of waste and reduced about 95,000 metric tons of GHG emissions. Let's understand from him what's the way forward. How do we reduce all of these waste that we are generating? What is our role, yours and mine, in solving this problem? And what is the role of the industry which is actually giving you these products? Let's find out more. Arun, thanks for joining the show.
Welcome, Sathya.
The last time we met at that event where we were trying to grapple with waste, it only piqued my curiosity and I wanted to know more. So I thought, let's have you on and understand a little more. So everywhere I go, it's just waste all across, right? I mean, you can say urban waste, rural waste. There's no such thing. You go on the roadside, there is waste everywhere. You see plastic packets, you see mounds of waste lying around. How big is this problem really?
Yeah, the problem is so big that we are not able to even understand how big the problem is. And, it's basically brushing it down the carpet. There are always these numbers floating around with the total assumptions, 62 million tons of waste per year, those kind of numbers. And also recently there were numbers around India, topping the charts with plastic waste generation as well. So these numbers are always floating around. But honestly speaking, data is a very big problem. So you really can't quantify the waste. But the waste is so big that we are unearthing things that have happened. I don't know how many decades back. For example, the groundwater, the leachate that's coming through the groundwaters, or the microplastics that's everywhere. So the problem actually is so big that we can't even realize how big the problem is. But what we can see in front of our eyes, it's as big as a remarkable change in a very negative sense, of course. So that is getting more and more obvious. Whether people like it or not, climate change is a reality. And that's how big the waste management problem is.
We don't seem to be able to do anything to do that, right? I mean, I go to conferences, I go to places. These are people who just reach out for that plastic bottle or just, take that without a second thought. It's just available. I don't know, where do we even pin our blame on? Is it our behavior, or is everybody supposed to be just careful of everything now, understand that much? Or is it the producer who put that plastic bottle on the table? Where does it even start?
Yeah, Satya, when I met you at the event, I was so happy to see a lot of reusable cutlery, right from the spoons and, the glass, instead of using single-use disposables, etc. So, and that's very few and far apart. That's very rare that I come across. So much so that these sustainability conferences, forums, etc., they all probably promote PET bottles, and they have the smallest size of PET bottles as well, which they keep on the tables. Not just that, when we go to the larger FMCG brands, the top officials, their offices actually serve in their branded PET bottles of water. unfortunately, not too many people, like we spoke about how big the problem is. Those PET water bottles actually have an expiry date. And it's surprising to know that we have put an expiry date to water also. So, actually speaking, the problem is so big and we are so late already that we have to do something about it. Unfortunately, not many people are doing anything about it. There are our traditional ways and means of looking at reduce and reuse, but that's all forgotten. And today, the real fact of the matter is, and this is actually a hidden secret, but there is more money in the plastic packaging than in the product itself sometimes. That's the reason why these things are going out of hand, to be honest. Um, Wherever there is a choice to be made, we can make a choice, but it's really down to us.
What does this whole waste value chain and the ecosystem look like? These are two different words I hear. Now there is you told me the other day that there is individuals as we consume and we throw things out and we let waste out. But even in the product reaching our hands, there are so many layers of waste that is generated along the way. Is that what you meant by saying there's more money in that whole thing? How do we unpack this?
When you talk about waste value chain, it's a very complex supply chain for that matter. But to simplify it, it's all built on a framework. And India is blessed with very good frameworks in the form of policies. Waste management policies in India have, it's been there since 2001. And in 2016, it started taking a really good, momentum. It picked up momentum. And today, some of the rules like the plastic waste management rules and e-waste management rules are having so many amendments that we are losing track of it. Sometimes it's too good to be true also, and sometimes it's over ambitious, trying to change things overnight. But when I look at waste management ecosystem, it's built on a framework of what we call as the waste management rules in India, the solid waste management rules, for example. And it's a really well established, well set up framework, and it's all down to us to really implement it and take it in the right spirit and take it into implementation. So when you look at the ecosystem, it has multiple aspects, and I can break it down into two simple aspects. Stakeholders, there are probably as many as 8 or 9 stakeholders, key stakeholders. Some of it is the government, and then the private sector, the informal sector. All of them form part of the people. And then there are the processes. And then when you start connecting these nodes together, the ecosystem is nothing but how efficiently you can have these transactions between people and processes in the form of transaction between nodes, such that it's the most efficient. And right now it's quite complex. So if I can simplify this in terms of numbers, typically there are 3 types of waste that comes out of a household. It is the inorganic waste, which we typically call dry waste. It is the other section is the organic waste, which is also nothing but your food waste. And then you have your domestic hazardous waste like sanitary waste and things like that. So if you take wet waste, of course, with food waste, there's just one category and you can recover it as one category. But then when you get into inorganic waste, which is the dry waste, you can, if needed, sort it into as many as 130 to 150 categories. That's how complex it is. And just imagine the supply chain. And we're then talking about millions of tons of waste. Now it has to get so complicated. And that is the biggest issue with waste management. But if waste management rules, the policies are taken as a good framework, there is a way out of all these things. And all stakeholders have to contribute equally to this.
The waste is anyway, the production of it is done by the private market. Why can't they also shoulder the responsibility of cleaning up afterwards? Is it the producer's responsibility, or can there be a specialized set of private players who can actually do the management of that waste and processing of that waste? How do you see that playing out?
So the private sector has a very huge role to play here. Sometimes we say, oh, it's the government's responsibility and they're not doing their job. And, if they don't collect it properly, I'm not going to do my job as a consumer and a waste generator. But honestly speaking, the government can't do it by themselves. There needs to be a way of a market and a business case that needs to come in. And this is where the private sector plays a very key role. Because, see, to be honest, we all know, and I use the typical case of plastic. We all know that plastics can last for 500 years once it is made. So why are we actually making something last for a few seconds? Like, let's say you're drinking a tender coconut and then you have a straw. How many seconds does it last you? So something that can last for 500 years, it's lasting for a few seconds. That is where the issue is. So if there is, the right collaboration between waste management agencies, the government, and the private sector to make sure that all of them work in sync, these problems can be solved. So if I can break it up even further, the government is there to provide guidelines and rules and policies. They are also there to provide infrastructure and everything. See, in India, probably there are the right level of budgets, but it's going in the wrong direction, right? It's going into the direction of take, dispose, dump. So because the landfills available, there's available landfills, and just go and dump the waste. So that's unfortunately the wrong way. And today, off late, something wrong is also happening in another context where waste to energy is also starting to come up, and that also unfortunately is a easier way out. So looking at the government, there are budgets. It has to be properly utilized. That's the responsibility of the government. Once the waste is collected, and then it comes into the hands of the informal sector. In India, we have a very well-established informal sector. Just that it needs a bit more professionalizing in the way they operate. So that is still a lot of work to be done in that segment where the waste pickers and waste workers can get professionalized. And then there are these waste management companies, or you can call them agencies, who are the specialists in handling the waste, and then it goes into the recycling supply chain. But this is where the private sector needs to play a very key role, because at the end of the day, let's talk about fast moving consumer goods. FMCG products are all out there, and a lot of packaging waste is out there. It's really down to the private sector to make sure they are, first of all, recyclable to start with. Then they will have to facilitate it to get recycled. And to do that, they have to create that supply demand needs to be very well established. And if the supply demand is established, materials can get recycled and then come back into the circular loop. So this is the key component that the private sector plays. To be very honest, it starts and it ends there. So they are key contributors here in this space for sure.
So when you talk about the private sector, there is the producer of these products, and then there is a recycler or a processor of the waste. Are these two separate things, or do you think as per that extended producer responsibility, the producer of the waste himself or herself need to take care of the other thing? How does this work? Are they capable of doing that?
So the private sector, they are looking at the forward logistics all the time, and they're special. And right now, if you, for example, talk about any single sachet of shampoo, the brands will be proud that it's reached every corner of the country, however remote the place is. That's the level of expertise that they bring in with forward logistics, the level of expertise they bring in with technology of, packaging and everything. What we have to do is we have to make them realize that, look, as a consumer, I have to demand such that the products that I use, I have a choice to consume something which is coming in a recyclable packaging, for example. And that is where the consumer has the power to push back. And if we all realize, the kind of mess that we are putting ourselves into, then we should be taking this decision quickly. So this is where it starts with, so the private sector, they can actually, the brands and, people who are now supposed to comply by the law of EPR, they will have to make their packaging more and more recycling, and then comes the usage. So now India has a mandate that the packaging, when it comes to plastic packaging, they will have to use recycled content in their packaging. This is where they will accommodate and they will create a demand. And to supply that against that demand, this is where the private sector can come in through various ways of investments, be it equity or whatever forms of investment, to set up the right kind of infrastructure. And there is a very good business case here. And a lot of recycling does happen in India, not to the extent that we would wish for, but it does happen. And then these products, like, the waste material then gets recycled. And this recyclate, as they're called, post-consumer recycle it for the regular consumer waste, then meets the demand created by the private sector. So, like I said earlier, they have to start and they have to create the demand. So they come at the beginning and at the end of the supply chain. But when it comes to recycling, yes, this is a interesting business model. Unfortunately, today we don't realize one fact, which is plastic is not recyclable. It's very, very difficult to recycle plastic. Unfortunately, that's been put into our head. And even if you look at any plastic bottle or packaging, it has a recycling triangle.
Oh.
It's got nothing to do with recycling. The Roybus triangle, as they call it, it's been kind of put in a way that it's going to have some behavioral change such that it makes it look like it's recyclable. But if you see a number 7 inside it, there are digits 1 to 7 marked. If it's a 7 inside the Roybus triangle, it actually means it's not recyclable. So, make it design for recyclability rather is very, very key.
So that's a very interesting point, because a lot of the products I was looking at, like I was mentioning the other day, I was looking at some cosmetics that we were picking up along with other stuff, and none of those, they're complex chemicals. They are out there, and we don't even know how to break them up, and we can't put them back. We can't break them back up into the original components they came in. And a lot of what we make are becoming such compounds that we can't break them back into even manageable pieces. So what ends up happening is it fuel? Let's burn it, because we don't know what else to do with it. So whatever we can't do anything with, we just want to burn it and say, "Okay, can it get us some fuel?" Inefficient, but I don't know what else to do with it. Otherwise, it's going back in the mound. It's going back. So we're either trying to hide it or we're just trying to burn it. Is the market being responsive to this? We are seeing increasingly more cosmetics, and I'm just using that as an example. There are so many other products, like you talked about plastic. What are the laws around these things? What does the law say?
To be very honest, there are lots of these chemical compounds which are out there which can fall under the hazardous waste category. Mm-hmm. And sometimes we could say that the hazardous waste policies are quite strict, and they are tracked for that matter of fact. But Sathya, we're talking about fundamental, very simple recycling methodologies like mechanical recycling. We're not even going into the advanced recycling opportunities. For hazardous waste, you can imagine how much more complex those processes and infrastructure should be. Today, we lack infrastructure with even the basic kind of recycling methodologies or recovery methodologies. And right now, it's not even at scale. It's all at small scale. So you're right. Unfortunately, we have to look at the next best thing. Instead of landfilling it and dumping it, or burning it, the next better option would be to send it away to cement factories, where the calorific value is utilized as an alternative to fossil fuel. It seems to be a okay-ish solution at the moment, not the best solution, but yeah, you're right. However, so what happens at these cement factories are they're burnt. They're exposed to very high temperatures so that the calorific value is recovered completely, like 1,300 degrees centigrade. And at those temperatures, you really wouldn't have too much of fumes coming out, or the carcinogenic material coming out, and it just becomes ash, the rest of it, which again is probably used back into the product manufacturing. But again, these factories probably have the best kind of chimneys with the right kind of scrubbing technologies, but we don't know what kind of harm they are doing. Technically, they seem to be ticking all the boxes, but genuinely speaking, we don't know what we are doing to our environment by just using them as fuel. Yes, it's a scalable option right now. It's the next best thing. But I think we have to get into the realms of more of regenerative economy. We're not even talking about, it's too late for circular economy. Let's move on beyond circular economy. And, we have to look at concepts that we've always looked at. When I was a kid, we used to use minimal amount of packaging. So I was just talking to my colleague, and, the per capita was so low in 2001, and compared to now, it's very high per capita waste generation for that matter. So concepts like reduce, reuse, refill, these will have to take precedence right now, because it's the need of the hour for sure. And that, brings down a lot of the dependency on having some sophisticated packaging, or, the cosmetics that you're talking about, etc. having to worry about them. Of course, there is also the concept of organic, but that's a different ballgame altogether. I would say the answer to your question would be go more traditional and adopt all the methodologies that our forefathers have left with us. And that's probably the better solution right now. Keep it simple.
How big is this gap between, are we just scratching the surface? Because if you, whatever numbers you have, every day there's lots of waste coming out of different types, and we have not changed our behavior. Our echo chamber has changed some behaviors, you and I might, but there's still a huge variety of people who are still educated, but who just reach out just like that. And when you say that there is so much complexity and we're just doing the small things, how do our viewers try to understand how far away we are in dealing with this stuff?
On a daily basis, we have many choices to take, to be honest, as consumers. Like, I try and notice myself in my behaviors throughout the day. It's the various choices that I make, which can be classified as the right choice or the wrong choice. For example, I stopped buying denims. I love denims, and I stopped buying denims.
Really?
Reason being, we all know that's on social media, the kind of craziness in terms of the water wastage for one pair of denim trousers as compared to your regular cotton linen trousers is quite high. It's crazy. So what I do instead, I still love my denims, right? I go and swap for them. I use something that I've not used. I take it out of my wardrobe. Like, for example, this weekend, I just picked up stuff from my wardrobe, which I don't use. There was something called as the swap event that happened in Bangalore. I went and exchanged it for a nice pair of denims. I have 5 pair of denims today. So I'm not, I'm taking the right choices, and I'm not sort of adding to the consumption of more denim, but I'm using something that someone else did not use. That's a simple solution for me. Things like whenever I'm buying, any FMCG products for my house, I try and buy the really big size cans rather than buying them in small packets. And I try and make sure that, it's a recyclable product, which is commonly used, things like that. I just would prefer to carry a hand towel rather than actually using tissue, because these days when I actually observe around me, the usage of tissues has gone up so much, especially in restaurants, etc., that it's unbelievable, right? I mean, 20 years back, there was no tissue. And how did we live those days? So these are the simplest of questions that we have to ask ourselves. And in my opinion, we have to feel proud about the smallest of change we brought in, because every single drop make the ocean. And for me, whenever I'm going out with friends, etc., I make sure I try and, while I am exhibiting these kind of behaviors, I try and inculcate them to other people as well. Of course, I get called names like Kachara Set or whatever, so my friends like calling me that. But there you go. At least they remember me for that. And next time they use a pair of, if they try to use tissues when they're in the restaurant, they'll think of me for sure. So, yeah, a lot of choices every day that we all can participate in. And the concept of reduce, for example, I stopped, buying food on Swiggy and Zomato, because I prefer to just go out and have a meal rather than actually getting it in a plastic container. And the heat of the food actually got, you don't know what kind of leachate is getting into your food as well. So those kind of smallest of changes we can bring about. Sometimes it is difficult, and sometimes for the sake of convenience, we don't do it. But for all the listeners out there are so many opportunities for everyone to contribute on a daily basis.
But in terms of volumes, you said there are lots of big numbers. You don't know how much is right. But if 100 units of stuff is going into the landfill, how much are we really able to process today? Which is do something with it, recycle it back, or take it back, or even burn it. How much of it are we even, out of every 100 units, how much is being removed back from the landfill or not being allowed to go to the landfill?
Yeah, I would say in India, and this number just comes with a lot of data from our operations on the ground with waste management services that we provide. I would say 50 to 60% does get recovered. I'll give you some examples. For example, metal. You wouldn't see too much metal on the streets, right? Because they have for a very, very long time in India actually got recovered, and the steel goes back to the steel plants and gets smelted again. So that's not a problem. Paper to some extent as well, I think they do get recovered, unless and until, like I said earlier, you take a piece of tissue and you wipe your hands with all the gravy and the masala in it, and you mixed it with wet waste, which is food waste, and the fibers in the tissue, the paper fibers can't be recovered, so that goes to waste. Just keeping all of that aside, your newspaper gets recycled, your notebooks, white paper gets recycled. So most of the paper does get recycled. But when it comes to plastic, I would say at least 70% to 80% does not get recovered. They all end up in the landfill. Plastics are of two types: your firm plastics, which are rigids, and then your flexible plastics. Flexible plastics, I would say, is quite high, like an 80%. Rigid plastics, I would say, is slightly better off, maybe a 50% or so. So on an average, I would say 70%, 60 to 70% of the plastic does not get recovered. So that's the kind of scenarios we have in India. It's not so bad as the Western countries, to be honest, and we should be proud about something that's happening in India. In the Western countries, they all just sort of get used up as fuel to heat their water systems, and or to create energy with very, very low efficiency. And I think this discussion can move forward into how you can actually recycle rather than downcycle, because when you are recycling too much of it, it's called as a closed loop recycling, which means that if you take, let's say you take a water bottle, you are not converting it back to a water bottle, you're downcycling it. So now some technologies are coming into how can you actually make a bottle out of a bottle. It's very small volumes, but that's the next level that we have to get into. And for that, we have to make sure we don't mix it with the food waste. You have to keep it separate into two bins, at home itself. So segregation at source is very, very important.
How much of a role does the informal sector play today? You guys have been working with them a lot. Why are they even there if this is possible to be handled well by the private sector?
Yeah, the kind of volumes and the recycling rates that I mentioned about, I will attribute a lot of that, a majority of that credit to the informal sector. I would call them the silent angels of the city, because at least if 50% of the waste is not seen on the streets, it's because of them. And they have multiple channels of actually getting this waste to the recyclers without it getting too contaminated and everything. So the worst case scenario is, you'll see litter pickers on the streets who pick the waste. That's starting to come down now, because the waste gets tapped at an earlier stage itself. So, for example, the kabadiwalas who come home to pick up your waste, etc., and they approach the waste at source, so you get very clean waste streams coming from your household. So that's also a very good thing. So informal sector play a very key role. There is a gap, however, in the context of them. They have to get professionalized in the way they work. They are experts, don't get me wrong, in the way they work. But for example, if you take inorganic waste, not all of it gets picked up, right? The kabadiwala will come home and they're not going to pick up everything from your household. The reason being that there are high value waste and then there is low value waste. So the low value waste is actually left back, and that is what ends up in landfill. For example, textile waste. You're not able to sell your textile waste because it does not have value today. No recyclers. So that portion, if waste pickers and waste workers can actually look at it in a very holistic way, that would be great. But then you can't ask too much out of them as well. And that is where we work with them to sort of include them. There's a very inclusive model to ensure that they become part of the supply chain, and they only consolidate onto the business models that we are trying to establish. But easier said than done. It's a long way away. Right now, there is no business case in waste management. It's a net negative, and because of which, the polluter pay principle, there has to be a service fee component. Otherwise, waste management does not work. So, access to such service fees, etc., the waste pickers do not have. They only have access to freely available waste. Sometimes they do the reverse. They pay for the waste, like newspapers at home that you sell. Of course, right? They're paying for the waste. So yeah, in that context, there's a little bit of a gap that is seen. But as of today, for many, many decades, the waste pickers and the informal sector have played a very key role, not just from the upstream, but also all the way to the downstream with aggregators and scrap dealers and everyone being a part of the supply chain.
Because there are so many actors and the entropic nature of the forward logistics, you think the extended producer responsibility is going to work because the reverse logistics cost is not factored in and these things are not going back? Do you really think they will be able to make EPR work effectively?
I mean, the efforts are on. The government is really trying hard, but unfortunately, it's gone in a very, very wrong direction in India. So I myself have been working with top brands and looking at EPR for at least 6 years now. And in these 6 years, we've seen tremendous amount of change happening. Unfortunately, a lot of people jump onto this bandwagon from a concept of trying to, get some quick bucks by paper trading. So right now, even if the work has not happened, the paperwork will be made available and that gets sold off for the credits, which is very unfortunate today. There are no audit mechanism in place. Again, I would like to credit the government and especially the Pollution Control Board to have taken quite a lot of bold moves. For example, concepts like recycled content in packaging and reuse, all those things have been included in the EPR context. But unfortunately, there have been a lot of scams that have surfaced recently. For example, recyclers have claimed to have recycled when there is no recycling machinery and there is only a empty facility. So a lot of people have been taken to task on these matters. But the EPR scene right now, unfortunately, over the past 2 to 3 years, has been very, very bad. At least 3 years back, it was diverting waste away from the landfill. There was a very clear, visual change as well that we were able to see in certain cities and everything. But today it's gone really in a bad direction. And hopefully we will see it turn around and come back. There are lots of efforts being taken by the government. For example, you mentioned about the costs. So non-recyclable plastic, first of all, needs to be provided a value, and then the reverse logistics cost needs to be added on top of that. Right now, it's not enough to match any of these two costs, and right now it's only being fueling the profits of the recyclers who have quite a large stake at it at the moment. And if I can bring in another concept, the fact that traceability is not being considered seriously enough as part of EPR is the main reason why this is happening over the past 2 years or so. But that's going to change. We are very hopeful about it.
With the ESG and sustainability goals, there is also this thing about scope 3 emission, which is like your impact and your further impact. Is there a chance that now with these things emerging, the EPR and scope 3 can somehow be merged in a way that traceability can be guaranteed? Because at least scope 3 is going to be reportable into your exchanges and everything mandatorily. EPR was never reportable in that way. I mean, it was there, but I don't know how, because I don't see any other way we can solve this problem. What are your opinions?
Yeah, I mean, unfortunate thing that waste management is considered as scope 3 because it's got a very direct linkage to climate action. So waste management and climate change is so directly linked because a lot of the waste gets dumped or burnt as of today as we speak, and that is causing a lot of direct impact onto the environment. So first opinion is that waste management should not be scope 3. It is too serious a matter for it to be considered scope 3 because today, unfortunately, when we talk to corporates and we say, oh, hey, you know what, as per your reporting around BRSR, etc., you have to consider waste management seriously. They say, oh, you know what, it's scope 3, so I'm not too worried about it. Strategically, I'm looking at scope 1 and 2 and, renewable energy and everything. So that is true. Of course, the green ecosystem, as we call it, it includes energy, it includes circular economy and everything. It includes a bioeconomy as well. But the circular economy concept is as important as energy or bioeconomy. So our first opinion in our organization, especially, is the fact that waste management is getting far less significance and importance, and it's getting pushed down the priority list. That's a very big problem. And there can be linkages to EPR for sure, because reporting has actually picked up. I didn't mention this last time, but the government has been very successful in putting out a lot of information out into the public. For example, a fact that one of the top FMCG companies generates 1 lakh tons of packaging waste in a year. That itself, to get that number, a solid number around the kind of scale at which they're putting out plastics, is quite a very impressive thing. So yeah, data is getting picked up as part of EPR and getting reported and getting monitored very, very diligently by the government. But yeah, it's not really linked so much with the waste management per se. So waste management can also come into mainstream of data reporting and everything. It's not yet happened, and if it remains to be scope 3, it's going to be too late with climate change and everything. So yeah, you can take a leaf out of the book of the EPR policies and bring that into the BRSR reporting. SEBI has done this just recently, so which is a very good move. Hopefully, we will see more and more turnaround in reporting the right numbers and giving the right importance to waste management.
Is there a lack of regulator here? Do you think KSPCB is adequately staffed to actually be able to enforce this? Why isn't there is a SEBI for financial market? Isn't this a big enough industry to have a regulator?
See, actually, when you look at the government, sometimes some of the government departments are so fabulous and they are so remarkable. Some of the bureaucrats, you have a lot of respect for them, and they do such a fantastic job. But on the other side, we have not seen KSPCB or a lot of the state pollution control boards to live up to their expectation. It's been really, really bad. And I don't have to say this. The newspaper speaks out very loud. So much so that the top officials of pollution control boards have been shifted out of their positions because of a lot of scams that have got unearthed, etc. So yeah, that's a very big problem. But on another note, the Central Pollution Control Board has done fabulous job. They are also understaffed, but they've been really pulling up their socks and really delivering. And there's been a lot of results. And sometimes when we talk to them, you won't believe this, Sathya. They are so well-meaning and they're so well-read. They are very well-informed, very hardworking as well. And also, I've seen this in the regional offices of Central Pollution Control Board. So in comparison to CPCB and the state pollution control boards, there is a huge, huge difference. And I really hope that, see, the pollution control board are the policing authorities, right? And they have so much at stake here. And for a very simple fact that, let's say we have to set up a recycling facility, you need your authorizations from the state pollution control board. Satya, you won't believe this. It took us 2 years for one of our units to get certified. And we did not do it anyway. We went the straightforward way. So that's the kind of difficulties we have to face with something like, the pollution control board, especially the state pollution control board. We hope that, the recent development will change things. Get better and better at their job.
But it comes back to how do you rein in the bad actors in the private sector space? Because is the waste management business not big enough to get professionalization and professional actors? You guys are there. You worn all kinds of hats to solve this problem. From being operators, taking up the tenders, to working with the informal sectors in the non-profit mode. Do you see many people join you in this journey of making it a big enough, important sector that you have professional players who are not out here to make a quick buck, actually solve the problem? Is there enough big bucks for the big guys to come in?
For the past 20 years, there's been very few of us in this space. However, over the past 5 years, I would say things are changing quite rapidly. So waste management is a very big field, right? Unfortunately, today it does not have an industry status, and there is no unified voice around waste management. Of course, there's a lot of effort around collaborative, approaches and everything, but still, there are very few of us who are actually wanting to collaborate and do the right thing. For the private sector, there are lots of opportunities for entrepreneurs, for startups. There are lots of opportunities for them to come and explore in this space. The investments are starting to come in, Satya. We're very happy to share that, some of the recycling infrastructures, cutting edge technologies are being installed and commissioned as we speak. Unfortunately, it is happening only in one small sector of waste management. So to start with, I just wish that we would have an industry status so that there is a very unified voice and there is more standardization, there is better practices, the best practices are brought on board, implementation of policy can happen in a better way. So that is a starting point for me. And also for everyone to move into this space. We were speaking about the ecosystem approach. So the entire ecosystem needs to be really reevaluated, and there are very big gaps, especially in the central segment of the supply chain, which is the collection and transportation. A lot of people need to come into this space, and when you look at it as a holistic way, right, there is definitely a business case. There is no business case when you look at it in isolations. Look at it as an ecosystem approach. There can be a business case, but you have to address it at scale and you have to address it in a very holistic way. Otherwise, it just falls apart. And this is what we have noticed. So, yes, this is a very important aspect to discuss, saying that there are opportunities. Some of the solutions have been proven very well. And it's just about time now that we all get into this. And a lot of opportunities are there for sure. There's no doubt.
Leave us with some thoughts on how can we as users, you said you need to reduce, think twice, but we still have people reaching out. How do we even get to them? Is because there could be perverse incentives. People have told me if the industry comes in, they'll want more waste. No, but if there's, my argument is if they're solving the problem and creating some amount of circularity and not just dumping them, then we are solving the problem. It doesn't matter how much it is, but that doesn't mean we can have unbridled consumption and unbridled production also. And it relies on predominantly us as consumers in making choices and voting with our feet. Any last thoughts on how do we start conveying this reduce message? Because that seems to be the hardest. We'll be branded anti-development organizations or whatever, individuals.
Yeah.
How do we even talk about this?
No, I feel that, it's the next trend that is going to set in. There's no doubt about it. And it's all cycles, isn't it? It's ups and downs, things like that. So I feel somewhere that, and I can see this as well, that, becoming more traditional has become cool. It's become trending now. Yeah. And for me, the fact that, sustainable travel, for example, has become a very cool thing. People are talking about it quite a lot. Carrying your own, straw, a metal straw or a bamboo straw, using a bamboo toothbrush. All of these have become the next cool thing. So for me, I think the young generation are very sensible. They ask the right questions. Unlike me, when I was young, I didn't ask the right questions. I'm asking myself those questions too late now, though. But still, never. I mean, it's better late than never. But yeah, the current generation, the younger generation, have the right questions to ask, and if they're able to see through this facade that is being put in front of us by a lot of the private sector guys, it's very clear. So there is a sense of satisfaction and a sense of achievement. Okay, I'll give you a typical example. So a very large multinational, they came up with this solution saying, I'm going to sell, the glass cleaners, I'm going to sell them in cartridges right now. So what do? You actually take the cartridge, you put it into your old spray can, and then you fill it with 90% water. So the question I was asking myself is, what were you doing all these days? You're claiming that you're using less packaging now, it takes up less shelf area, you spend less on transportation. So have you been selling 90% of water in your glass cleaner until now? It feels so silly, right? So this is where that entire sense of satisfaction and the sense of achievement can come in, by us taking the right choices, saying, okay, I'm going to stop buying that. Let me try and look at more traditional ways of how I can clean my glass. You don't need to sell me a product and I stock it in my shelves over here. I can clean my glass in other better ways. So these innovative ways and means is actually the way of the younger generation. Bring it into the trend, make it cool, because it is cool, to be honest. There is a lot of sense of satisfaction and and also if you are so good with your social media, put it out on your reels and make it even more famous. So I think it's a knock-on effect. But I want to leave all of us with one very important factor, one important thought, which is the power of consumers is beyond our imagination. We can't really imagine how powerful a consumer can be, and especially with the choices that we make on a daily basis. And just to prove my point here, you can just look up this on the internet. Scandinavian countries challenged toothpaste manufacturers saying, I'm not going to buy your toothpaste if it comes in a box. So, toothpaste comes, it's a tube. Here's a quick challenge. Just tighten, screw it up. Not so tight also, just reasonably tight. Stand on it. Nothing is going to happen to it. It's so strong, right? Why do you need a flimsy carton package to protect it? Obviously, they're not protecting it. They're marketing it. It's a marketing gimmick. So consumers in, I think it's the Scandinavian countries, they all went, against this concept, and they said, I'm going to buy the tubes which comes by themselves. So the brand started stacking them up on the caps, vertically, and there was a nice branding gimmick there. And you don't find toothpaste coming in carton boxes. That's the power of consumers, and we can do this as well in India without an iota of a doubt. It's definitely possible, and that's what makes it so exciting. And circular economy is in our palms. It's not with anybody else. The power is in our palms.
Awesome words to end the show. Thanks for those wise words. Hopefully, we'll make some difference. Thanks, Arun, for being on the show.
Absolutely. Thanks for inviting. All the best, Sathya.